Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 273, Bully Hayes, Part 5. Now to what happened to his numerous wives and children. So his first wife, Rosetta Collis, and daughter Hannah. We know that after their daughter Hannah was born, that Rosetta called herself Mrs. Hayes and moved to Melbourne. On the 26th of March, 1879, she died at Carlton, aged only 41, from consumption, that is tuberculosis. Their daughter Hannah married Henry Edward Nudd, known as Harry, on the 12th of December 1875 in Victoria. Hannah was 18 when her father died and 20 when her mother died. Henry and Hannah divorced on the 26th of April 1883. In a Melbourne newspaper, it outlined the divorce. Nudd versus Nudd. This was a petition by Henry Edward Nudd, a machinist in the Argus office, for the dissolution of his marriage with his wife, Hannah Rosetta Nudd, on the grounds of her adultery with W.B. King, a compositor in the same establishment. The petitioner stated he was married to the respondent on the 7th of December 1875 by the registrar of Fitzroy. They lived together for 14 months and his wife then went to her mother to be confined. The child only lived a few weeks. She returned to him when she became convalescent and lived with him for 6 months. In July 1877, he went home from his business and found the respondent had left the house. Her mother denied having any knowledge of her, but he believed that for some time she lived at her mother's home. After the petitioner had lived for a few months in lodgings, he yielded to the entreaties of his mother-in-law and of his wife and commenced housekeeping with them. They resided together until his mother-in-law died. After that event, the petitioner and the respondent continued to live together till September 1879. One day in that month, the respondent took the petitioner's dinner to him to prevent him from going home at midday, as was his usual custom, and then asked him to be home by 6 o'clock as she wished to go to the theatre. On going home, he found she'd taken all of the furniture away and locked up the house. He did not see her for a considerable time, and I was told she had left the country, but in February 1881 she returned to him very ill and begged him to take her back, which he did. On the 28th of August of the same year, the respondent left him again in the same way she'd previously done, and it was subsequently discovered that she was living with the co-respondent. He had never done anything to cause his wife to leave home. She had a very bad temper. Sometime after she last left him, he met her in the street and told her she'd played him a mean trick after his having forgiven her so many times. She replied she'd found a better man than he was and intended to stick to the other man. When she was served with the citation and copy of the petition, she stated that she was Mrs. King and introduced the co-respondent as the father of the child she had living with her. The court granted a decree for dissolution of marriage with costs against the respondent. So on the 17th of May 1883, in the marriage notices, King Hayes, William Bromley, King of Richmond, to Hannah Rosetta Hayes, only daughter of the late Captain William Henry Hayes. They had a stillborn son, John William King, and they then had a daughter, Elizabeth Esther King, in 1888, who died at 1. They also had a son, William Bromley King Jr., on the 17th of November 1889. He lived until he was 93. They had another son, Edmund Dunbar King, in 1891. Then Walter Tasman King on the 12th of November 1893, who died in France in World War I, aged 22. And lastly, Henry George King, who was born on the 30th of November 1895. He was the only child to have children of his own. He served in World War I and married Violet Keeley in 1914. Henry was a cook and they had 4 children with 3 surviving infancy, and he died at the age of 80 in Erskineville, New South Wales. Hannah died on the 1st of September 1904 in Prahran, Victoria, aged only 46, and when her youngest child was only 9. The next partner was Emily Butler and her children. An account said that while living in Samoa, Hayes accused his wife of carrying on with a German resident. He thereupon imprisoned his wife and 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy, on a small island near Samoa, and they were there till Bully Hayes met his death, when the missionaries brought Mrs. Hayes and her family to Fiji, and she later went into the Victoria Hotel, Suva, Fiji. The accusations made by Hayes against his wife are not widely believed, and during her residence in Fiji, she was one of the most respected and well-liked women here. So from June 1883 to March 1884, Mrs. Emily Hayes was lessee of the Victoria Parade Hotel, Suva, Fiji. So the children that he had with Emily Butler: Leonora Harriet Mary Hayes, who was a twin and was born on the 2nd of May 1866 in Littleton, New Zealand, married Dr. Bernard Ernst Friedrich Karl Funk on the 19th of January 1881 at Apia, Samoa, when she was only 15. Bernard was 22 years older than Leonora. Leonora left Bernard 6 months after their marriage and went back to live with their mother Emily. Funk put a notice in the Samoan Times on the 11th of June 1881 stating, "I shall not be responsible for any debts contracted in my name without my written authority, Dr. Funk." Nevertheless, in January of the following year, Emily Hayes, with cunning she might well have learnt from her pirate husband, made a claim against Funk through the German and American consulates for a debt of £146 that she alleged was accounted for the food and clothing she'd provided for his wife and their child. In response, Funk agreed to pay for any costs associated with his child, but he refused to pay the full amount sought, on the basis that both Mrs. Hayes and Leonora were well aware of the public notice he put in the Samoa Times. Eventually, despite being discouraged to do so by the German consul, Emma Hayes took the matter to the arbitration court, where it was promptly ruled that Funk was obliged to pay only for the expenses of his child. To get an idea of how savvy Emily was, she wrote a letter to Mr. J.E.V. Elford, who was the acting US consul. "Sir, having prepared a claim against Dr. Funk for certain goods supplied to his wife and child, I now ask you to use your endeavours on my behalf to cause Dr. Funk to return to me the goods or the amount thereof as per bill delivered by $146. These accounts are only for clothing as supplied to his wife and child without any charge for board or expenses of her confinement. Now Dr. Funk has said he will pay $20 or thereabouts for some of the child's clothing. Therefore the said Dr. Funk, by offering to pay, renders himself liable for the whole, and if he cannot afford to pay for them, let him return them to me intact. I applied to Dr. Funk through the German consul to return these goods if not paid for, which the German consul approved. I applied yesterday for the goods but was denied, and Dr. Funk told my native servant there is nothing here belonging to Mrs. Hayes. If he carries such a high hand, I must also demand the following goods lent at the time of his marriage, some of which were in use, and I measured some inconveniences from so lending. And all of these have been given a nominal amount. 6 lace curtains, an electric coffee pot, half a dozen dessert spoons, half a dozen teaspoons, half a dozen silver-plated forks, half a dozen small forks, 1 water bottle, a crystal glass sugar bowl, a crystal glass salt shaker with spoons to match, a silver mustard spoon, and a china vase, all totalling $128.50. To a bill delivered for mats and labour and goods drawn by Mrs. Funk from the store just after her marriage and never noticed, $17. All the items above I demand to be returned in the same order as when lent. I am under no obligation to Dr. Funk, and he cannot expect me as a widow to furnish his house as it was at first understood they were to be returned. Anything but gentlemanly conduct in putting an advertisement in the Samoa Times, not to give trust to anyone without written authority, and without mentioning his wife's name after causing her, through his bad conduct, was all mentioned in a letter to the German acting consul in her own handwriting. I am, sir, yours respectfully, E. Hayes." So the child that they're referring to was Conrad Bernard Ernst Funk, who was born on the 18th of October 1881 at Apia, Samoa, when Leonora was still only 15. Interestingly, this son was formerly known as Conrad Funk, but appears to have been known in Apia as Fred Hayes instead. According to archival records held in New Brandenburg, the old doctor was taken in by his son later when he fell ill. Then a letter written to the Imperial German Consulate in Apia on the 14th of January 1882. "Sir, I beg to acknowledge the receipt of your letter of today's date, together with the copy of a letter from Mrs. Hayes to you regarding certain claims against her son-in-law, Mr. B. Funk. I also received notice for the claims of Mrs. Hayes against Dr. Funk to the amount of $146.50.5. I have shown to Dr. Funk the claims of Mrs. Hayes as contained in Mr. Dawson's letter and the voucher and tried to persuade him to settle the matter amicably. After seeing and going through the vouchers, Dr. Funk declared that he did not feel obliged to pay, but would voluntarily pay certain items marked in red in the vouchers, amounting together to $23.50.5. Dr. Funk refused on the following grounds. He says Mrs. Funk left his house in June last year against his will and did not come back. Although warned at the request of Dr. Funk through the acting German consul, Mr. von Olgen, as to the consequences of her wilfully leaving her husband. Dr. Funk then gave public notice in the Samoa Times that he would not be responsible for any debts contracted without written authority. Therefore, he declares Mrs. Hayes has furnished her daughter with all those things she now claims payment for at her own risk and declines to pay for them. I went to Mr. Dawson and to Mrs. Hayes and told them Mr. Funk's answer. Mrs. Hayes then said to me, I want the whole sum of $146.50.5 from Dr. Funk, not a part payment. If he does not pay, I'll request him to give back all the dresses and clothing Mrs. Funk and her baby received from me. I approved of this way to settle the dispute, but at once expressed my doubts as to whether Dr. Funk would be able to return all the things as he did not receive them personally. I then spoke with Dr. Funk about it, and he declared that he did not know what Mrs. Funk had received from her mother, and he was not responsible for these items, and that the affair was between Mrs. Hayes and his wife. He further said that Mrs. Funk had told him Mrs. Hayes took the dresses of her daughter for her own use and gave her daughter some others in exchange. I've tried in vain to bring the matter to a settlement and must now leave it to Mrs. Hayes as to whether she'll take legal steps against Dr. Funk before the German Consular General or beg to settle the dispute by arbitration. Dr. Funk gives an additional reason for not paying these expenses, that Mrs. Funk wrote and signed a declaration before she returned to his house, which declaration is registered at this consulate, that Mrs. Hayes forced Mrs. Funk by heavy threats to leave her husband and to spread about lies of cruel and brutal treatment and want of sufficient food and clothing. I should think that to settle the dispute in question, arbitration would be the better plan for all concerned, would entail less cost and create less bitter feeling. Dr. Funk, feeling that he had a moral obligation to pay for anything expended for his child, had already made this offer to Mrs. Hayes, who refused to accept it. Now it is my opinion to award Mrs. Hayes the sum of $50 for such expenditure. The coffee and teapot I consider as belonging to wedding presents made by Mrs. Hayes to her daughter Leonora even before the wedding. The lace curtains Mrs. Funk declares were given to her by Mrs. Hayes on moving into the house now occupied by Dr. Funk. Therefore, Mrs. Hayes cannot claim them. The controversy surrounding the end of his marriage did not end there for Bernard Funk. In September 1882, Leonora applied through the German consulate for a divorce on the basis that her husband had exercised cruelty against her. To support her claim, Leonora also had a statement from her friend, an apparently very credible witness, Mrs. Phoebe Parkinson nee Coe, the daughter of the American consul J.M. Coe and sister of the famous early businesswoman of the South Pacific, Queen Emma Coe. In her account of a visit to the Funk's house in July 1882, Phoebe gave a vivid description of the state in which she found Leonora after her husband had allegedly beaten her. At Apia on the 5th of September 1882, Mrs. Parkinson, nee Phoebe Coe, appeared before me, the undersigned official, and gave the following evidence. On the 27th of July, I went to the house of Dr. Funk at the hospital and knocked 3 times at the door at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Dr. Funk came out of the bedroom and led me into the parlour and put me on the chair. I asked him where his wife was. He said she was in the bedroom, very bad and very sick. Then 2 Samoan women came in with the baby, and one of them, Maveo, winked at me as to come into the bedroom. I winked back to say that I'm afraid of the doctor. Then he went in the bedroom but soon came out again and we talked a little more. While we were sitting there, I heard Leonora crying out very loud when he went and stopped her. He came out again and shut the door. Then he said he was going to Woods, the barber next door, to get eggs for the baby. After he left, the 2 Samoan women showed me a whip which was hidden under the bookcase and told me that this is the whip by which the doctor whipped his wife. I asked them the reason for which he did that, and they said they did not know exactly what for. They only saw the doctor and his wife playing with the monkey that tore up her dress. The doctor then took her at the back of the neck and dragged her inside the bedroom and shoved her under the bed. He then got the whip and whipped her while the women watched. I went into the bedroom to Leonora, who was asleep on the bed. Her dress was entirely torn up. A bucket near the bed was full of heaving up. I awoke her and she seemed to be too weak to talk to me. She was only moaning. Her face was so red it looked as if blood was coming out. Her eyes were blue and swelled up. I kissed her and said, "I can't stay. I must run out before your husband comes back." She only opened her eyes once, and seeing that it was me, and she began crying but never said a word. So I went back to the parlour. Then the doctor came and I went away. Leonora told me repeatedly that her husband whipped her often before this. Once she told me in consequence of a slap, one of her eyes got so bad it took a long time to cure. She told me this was when they came back from Savai, where I had heard of it. Leonora also told me about several times whenever the doctor beat her, he said to go home to her mother. He did not want her anymore, but he would keep the child. She said if it was not for the child, which was very weak and sickly, she would have gone home. I believe the child was so sick in consequence of the ill treatment of the mother turning her milk sour. Leonora also told me that the doctor sometimes would come home, take hold of the baby and throw him so violently on the bed, the floor, or anywhere else that she thought the little fellow must break something. I am ready to swear to my statements and sign my name as follows: Phoebe Parkinson. There was also a letter written to Captain Zemsch, who was the Imperial German Consul at Apia. "Sir, I wish to apply to you for a divorce from my present husband, Dr. Bernard Funk. My grounds on the application is cruelty exercised towards me. After a temporary separation from him and returning to him, he treated me kindly while Mr. G. Orban lived in the house. A short time after that, he cruelly beat me with his fists, and for some weeks I thought I should have lost the sight of one of my eyes from a blow received from him. On the 27th of July, he beat and bruised me with his fists and with the handle of a horsewhip, causing me to have 2 black eyes. Dr. Ross can certify the bruises on my body. For some days I was in great pain. I feel sure that if I remain living with him, my child would not now be living on account of his brutal treatment to me while the child was suckling. Under these circumstances, I ask for a divorce in your court, and also allow me the necessary expenses and allowance which you may consider due to me, more especially while the child requires a mother's care. I am, sir, yours respectfully, Leonora Funk." At the tender age of 17, Leonora divorced her husband, Dr. Bernard Funk, in 1883 at Apia, Samoa. Bernard had been born on the 8th of August 1844, and he'd graduated in 1865 from the local grammar school and started at the University of Berlin and then later at the University of Tübingen, where he completed his medical studies. He then joined the Prussian army as a surgeon, and he treated the wounded in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and 1871. He then got a position in the Hamburg American Steamship Company as a medical officer. He did this for 2 years, and then he got the opportunity of working for Godfrey's as a medical officer on the firm's Samoan plantations. He accepted this in February 1880, and that's when he first stepped on the Apia shores. Before he arrived, medical care at the time on Samoa were really just plant-based remedies and massage. Funk spent most of his days travelling between the huge plantation at Utamatu in the morning and then to patients' homes in the afternoon, and at the same time he also established a small private hospital at his home. The Cyclopedia of Samoa says that Funk was a popular man in Samoa. His familiar figure, cigar in mouth and cane in hand, may be seen on the beach almost every day. He wasn't your average colonial doctor. He was part adventurer, part mystic and part mad scientist. He spoke Samoan, he understood the spirit world of the islands, and he treated everyone, European, Samoan, rich or poor. If they couldn't pay, he'd rip up the bill. He operated between 2 worlds, a bridge between modern medicine and ancient belief. When his patients sought a traditional healer instead of him, he didn't rage. He watched, he listened and learnt, and even wrote a book on the Samoan language, complete with a section on medical terms. After his divorce, he married Senatima, who was 26 years younger than him, and while her husband could be grumpy, she was known to all as friendly. She was the daughter of Chief Telea. Funk's friend, the German ethnographer Augustin Kramer, described Senatima as charming. After Funk's death, the following description was given of her by Erich Schultz, the colonial governor of Samoa. All the settlers here value her very much. She's been able to fit into the part of the wife of a very well-known European doctor. She's learned German very quickly and is perfect at it. Even after the death of her husband, she kept up the lifestyle of a European, although she remained very reclusive. The high level of respect that Senatima enjoyed as a Samoan woman is further illustrated by the fact that after Funk's death in 1911, she received 2 payments from the German administration, a sum of 500 marks in 1912 and 200 marks in 1914, for helping to spread the German language in Samoa. Senatima had at least one daughter with Dr. Funk, and she died in 1956 in Samoa. Before he died in 1911, he arranged for a stone bearing his name to be placed at the edge of Lake Lanunato, and there it sits, weathered and mossy, where the jungle meets the mist. It's one last mark from a man who belonged more to Samoa than he ever did in Germany. Other than his medical contribution, he donated an ethnographic collection that contained 250 examples of Samoan artefacts to the local museum in his hometown of New Brandenburg, and it's now in the regional museum. Early in 1911, Bernard Funk left Samoa to return to Germany for medical treatment. He never returned to his adoptive island home. On the 8th of April 1911, he died in Berlin after a long illness, and he was buried 4 days later in the town of his birth, New Brandenburg. The doctor's obituary read that he died far away from his new home. On the 26th of July 1884, Leonora, aged only 18 and a divorcee, was married to Alexander McLean of Rua, Fiji, a planter. Previous to the marriage with McLean, Leonora Hayes gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, and in the registrar it stated their father was Alexander McLean. On July the 23rd, 1884, also previous to her marriage with McLean, judgment was delivered in 2 actions: Emily Hayes versus McLean and Leonora Hayes versus McLean, the former for the loss of her daughter's services and the latter for a breach of promise. Mrs. Hayes was awarded £150 and her daughter £500 with costs. These actions concluded on July the 23rd, 1884, when Leonora married McLean on the 26th. She left him and married a man named Thomas Bond of Brisbane, Queensland, in April 1909. Bond brought a suit for divorce, no doubt being informed that McLean was alive at the time of the marriage with Bond. The twins mentioned were Ernest and Blanche McLean. Blanche died at 11 months old in Fiji. Ernest Charles Alexander McLean married Ellen Seater in Brisbane in November 1905, and by the 14th of October 1908, Ernest left Ellen, and their son Alexander was born in May 1907. Ernest applied for a commission in the Australian Imperial Force in North Melbourne in 1914, and he listed his wife, Rose Catherine McLean, as his next of kin. This was Rose Catherine Anson. Rose was also married. She'd married Lewis Gosling in 1906. Together, they had a son, Ernest Alexander McLean, known as Alex, on the 15th of June 1915 in West Melbourne. When Ernest enlisted in the AIF on the 15th of March 1915, he named Jessie Maud McLean as his wife. Jessie Maud McLean had married James Denham in 1904 and had 2 children with him, and James died only on the 9th of March 1915. So the certificate of marriage, stating that they married at the Presbyterian Church on the 14th of October 1916, Ernest Charles Alexander McLean to Jessie Maud Denham. Him a bachelor and her a widow. And it stated that she was widowed on the 9th of March 1915. Ernest McLean said that he was born in Dundee, Scotland, while Jessie had been born in Cranbourne. He stated he was 31 and an electrical engineer, and she was a school teacher, aged 32. He said his father was Alexander Andrew McLean, a chemical manufacturer, and Joyce MacDonald was his mother. They had 3 children together, one of them being Leonora Joy, who was born in July 1917. The birth notice for Leonora said that she was born at Dalkeith Private Hospital to Lieutenant McLean of the AIF and Mrs. McLean. Blanche was born in June 1920 in South Africa, and Vivian Lex in Pretoria, South Africa in September 1923. By 1930, the family were living in London, and Ernest was a manufacturer. He was travelling to Canada and the US in his job. In January 1937, Ernest commenced a relationship with Esther Bledsoe, and they had a daughter, Carla Verdis McLean, in Seattle, USA, on the 4th of October 1937, and another daughter, Nisa Leonora McLean, on the 10th of December 1938 in Santa Clara, California, US. They lived all their lives in the US. Ernest died on the 20th of September 1965 in North Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, at the age of 81, and this is where Jessie died on the 23rd of June 1969, aged 84. So getting back to Leonora, she married Thomas Arthur Bond, as mentioned, on the 21st of November 1889 in the Christ Church of England in Milton, Queensland. Thomas was an accountant. Leonora stated that she was a widow and born in Christchurch, New Zealand at the time of their marriage. He was 27 and she was 23, based on the marriage record. They had 2 children together, George in 1894 and Lottie in 1895, both born in Brisbane. So it seems the practice of bigamy, falsifying records, seems to have been a bit of a genetic trait, and it certainly is the case when you look at George Arthur Cooper Bond, this son of Leonora and Thomas Bond. He was married to Emily Wilkinson Pearce at St James's Church in Sydney, New South Wales on the 1st of September 1913 when he was 18. He listed his occupation as a merchant. Emily was Irish and had immigrated with her family when she was 10, and she was 27 when they married. They had a daughter, Charlotte Emily, who was known as Betty, on the 10th of December 1914 in Brisbane, then Marjorie Frances in 1916 in Victoria, and a son, Thomas Hamilton Cooper, who was born on the 11th of January 1918 in Elstonwick, Victoria. Emily and her children lived in Victoria all their lives. On the 31st of May 1923, George was listed in the Victorian Police Gazette under the Missing Friends section. George Arthur Cooper Bond, inquired for by his mother, Mrs. L. McLean of Bath in South Kensington, Sydney, 28 years old, 6 foot tall, blue eyes, dark hair and broad shoulders. On the 1st of November 1923, in the Melbourne Herald, Bond's child, assault and seizure, wife gets custody. It was only an afterthought on his part that his wife is not a fit and proper person to have control of the child. I believe she is a fit and proper person, and I also believe that he assaulted his wife. In these words, Mr. Justice MacArthur in the practice court today decided the question of the custody of Thomas Hamilton Bond, the 5-year-old child of Mr. and Mrs. George Cooper Bond. While the issue was being tried, little Tom sat patiently alongside Lottie Thompson, Bond's sister, with whom the youngster has latterly been living. Mrs. Bond applied for a writ of habeas corpus, compelling her husband to deliver up the child, but she succeeded in getting immediate custody of the child without the execution of the writ. She took the boy away with her from the court. A stormy scene that occurred between Mr. and Mrs. Bond in Collins Street following Bond's recent attempt to have a maintenance order quashed, with one of the subjects of 2 affidavits read before Mr. Justice MacArthur in the case. The husband's version did not correspond very closely with his wife's. She alleged that he assaulted her and used bad language, and he denied the assault and bad language and accused his wife of using abusive language. The alleged seizure of the child by Bond was the main feature of the affidavit signed by Mrs. Bond. She alleged that Bond seized the boy and took him to the residence of his sister, Mrs. Charlotte Thompson, Lottie, South Yarra, on Sunday the 21st of October, and declared that neither her husband nor her sister were fit and proper people to have control of the child or to come into contact with him. He took the child, she said, in order to force me to abandon an assault charge which I have made against him. On the 15th of October, the day after my husband appealed against the maintenance order, I met him in Collins Street. He assaulted me by violently kicking me. Our child was with me and he began to cry. Bond said, "Take him away or I'll give him something to go on with too." A summons was subsequently served on him for assault. Bond took the child away in a motor car to his sister's home in Anderson Street, South Yarra, on the 21st of October. I have not resided with him since February 1922, nor has he had anything to do with Tom or our other 2 children. Mrs. Bond declared that her husband called for the child at her residence in Caulfield. Being told that the boy was at Sunday school, he went away and returned to say that he was taking Tom away to his sister's place. In answering the affidavit, Bond asserted that when he got the child away from Mrs. Bond, the youngster told him that he had not had a bath for 3 months. The child was in a filthy condition. In Collins Street, referencing the alleged assault, Mrs. Bond came up to me with 2 other women and used abusive language. She was alluding to my sister and a lady friend. I remonstrated with her for using such language in the presence of the child. I do not use bad language and I did not assault her. I took the child because I thought Mrs. Bond was not a fit and proper person to have him. When we were living at Elwood, my wife put some matter in my whiskey decanter, and when I discovered it, she said it was at the instigation of her mother, who had been living with us at my expense. He also alleged that Mrs. Bond was continually running up debts and was often out late with men. On the 19th of March 1936, George made a false application for a British passport under the name of Arthur Boyd to escape the warrants that were out for his arrest. This application for the British passport had his name as Arthur Boyd, living in West Perth, care of C. Smith, that he was a station hand and single, that he was born in Hampshire, England on the 1st of September 1897, he was British, and arrived in Australia in June 1913 from London on the Themistocles and landed at Sydney. He said he wants a passport to proceed to England to collect money due to me in an estate. I intend to leave Fremantle on the SS Hobson's Bay on the 21st of March for an indefinite period. And Aidan Bryan, the president of the Fremantle Businessmen's Association and the ex-mayor of Cottesloe, who was of Fremantle, vouched for him. So on the 4th of April 1936, at the age of 41, he was charged with conspiring to obtain money by fraudulent means. George was charged with Charles Powell that between the 1st of September 1935 and the 10th of March 1936 in Brisbane, he conspired to obtain money from Robert Weatherall and others by fraudulent means. He featured in the Police Gazette. From the CI branch of Brisbane, George Bond, otherwise known as George Cooper Bond, 6 foot 3 inches high, proportionate build with a fresh complexion, brown hair, blue eyes, small brown moustache, or he may be clean shaved, brown eyebrows, high forehead, thick lips, walks very erect, usually dresses in a brown suit, a company promoter and share salesman, a native of Queensland, addicted to drink and fond of the company of women. When last heard of, he was at St James's Flats in King Cross in Sydney. On the 12th of March 1936, he was accompanied by a man named Phil Dare, who resembles him and who may try to obtain a passport on which Bond will attempt to leave Australia, presumably for the East. Bond was in possession of a 1925 Master Model Chevrolet Coupe. The registration was listed, and it was registered in the name of Black Sands Queensland Limited, a company in which he and Powell were connected with and which was used to perpetrate the present alleged swindle. It sounds virtually a mirror of what his grandfather's misdeeds were. So on the 20th of April 1936, George, using his false passport in the name of Arthur Boyd, boarded the Hobson Bay in Fremantle, bound for Southampton, England. So on the shipping record, he stated his occupation was a grazier, not a station hand now. He was 39 when in fact he was 41, and he intended to reside at the Regent Palace Hotel in London. On the 23rd of August 1936, he departed from Belfast Island. His last address in the UK was listed as the Grand Central Hotel in Belfast. He said he was 40 and his intended permanent residence was in Australia, and he listed himself as a sheep farmer. A warrant was issued for the arrest of George Arthur Cooper Bond in the South Australian Police Gazette on the 2nd of December 1936, and it said that in London on the 19th and 21st of August 1936 he defrauded Henry Richard Mann and others a total of £5,545, 10 shillings and 4 pence, as well as £1,387 and 16 shillings and 11 pence. To avoid arrest, he left by ship using the Arthur Boyd false passport. Using this passport, he sailed on the SS Florida from Havana, Cuba, to Miami, USA on the 11th of September 1936. He said he was born in Australia, but then it was corrected, and then his passport states he was born in England on the 1st of September 1897. He said he was a 39-year-old sheep farmer and that he had a visa issued in Montreal, Canada in August 1936. On the 22nd of March 1937, George, now known as John Boyd Cabot, sailed from Nassau, Bahamas to Miami, Florida on the 22nd of March 1937. He stated he's single, his date of birth, the 1st of September 1897. He said he was born in San Francisco, claiming to be a US citizen, and his usual address, Miami, Florida. George, as John Boyd Cabot, married Claire Margarita Hilfiger in Miami, Florida on the 12th of January 1938, so therefore committing bigamy just like his grandfather. On the 6th of February 1938, in the Miami News, his new wife, has a newspaper article with her photo saying she is a recent bride. Sir John Boyd Cabot is married at the beach. The marriage of Miss Claire Hilfiger of New York and Miami Beach to Sir John Boyd Cabot of London on January the 12th at St. Patrick's Catholic Church is being announced. Mrs. Cabot spent the early part of her life in Switzerland, where she received her education. She came to Miami Beach from New York. The bridegroom is a graduate of Oxford University in England and came to the US 18 months ago. He is the son of the late Henry S. Cabot, who was a commander in the British Navy during the World War, and his title came to him following the decease of a number of his family during that time. He's interested in yachting and is a member of the Rod and Reel Club. They're residing in their new home on the Miami River at Grove Park. Meanwhile, on the 9th of July 1938, in the Queensland Police Gazette, the CI branch in Brisbane, further inquiries are requested with a view to the apprehension of George Bond, otherwise George Cooper Bond, and Charles Powell, who are wanted for conspiracy at Brisbane. The former is identical with George Arthur Cooper Bond, wanted for false pretences in England. He left England for Canada in August 1936, but it's believed he'll eventually return to Australia. So as far as Australia is concerned, he's vanished into thin air. In 1942, in the US World War II draft, he has a registration card, and under the name of John Boyd Cabot of New York, he registered as a US citizen. He said he was born in San Francisco on the 1st of September 1895, and he stated he was employed at the Atlas Trading Company in New York City. In 1946, John Boyd Cabot, head of the Cabot Shipping Company, purchased the French Lick Springs Hotel in New York City from Thomas Taggart for $4 million. On the 6th of June 1947, he purchased Castle Knoll Farm for $250,000 from Bond Brothers Incorporated of Indianapolis. The white-fenced Castle Knoll Farm is one of the most elaborate farms in Indiana. It consists of 5 residences, 8 barns, a hunting lodge, a quail hatchery and a slaughterhouse. The Indianapolis Star on the 6th of June 1947 has an article on the purchase. John B. Cabot, head of the syndicate which owns the famed French Lick Springs Hotel, announced today that he's purchased the 2,600-acre Castle Knoll Showplace Farm on the Palo French Lick Road for £250,000. Included in the transaction are 500 head of prize Hereford cattle. It is the intention of Mr. Cabot to raise all of the beef, hogs, chickens and veal for use in the hotel, as well as operate the farm as a breeding and marketing business. A spur of the Monon Railroad and Lost River Run is through the acreage, and there are 1,400 acres in timber and 1,200 acres in bottom and pasture land. The Cabot holdings include the spa grounds themselves that mount to 4,500 acres in Orange County, with the purchase of the farm. In 1950, the French Lick Springs Hotel was foreclosed by the insurance firm. The original loan given to John B. Cabot for the purchase of the French Lick Springs Hotel was $1.5 million. 4 years later, the loan amounted to nearly $1.6 million. And an article in the Cincinnati Enquirer of Ohio on the 9th of March 1950. At New Albany, Indiana, Massachusetts Mutual Life Insurance Company today filed a mortgage foreclosure suit against the owners of the famous French Lick Springs Hotel in French Lick, Indiana. The suit, filed in the Federal District Court here, stated that the debt was increased in March 1948 and again in this year. The big resort hotel was bought 4 years ago by the company headed by John B. Cabot of Cabot Shipping Company of New York. In New York, Cabot said his firm had paid off £150,000 on the hotel mortgage and had added £200,000 worth of improvements to the property. However, he said the insurance concern wanted the Cabot company to put another $200,000 into the property and it declined to do so. Cabot and his company would not oppose the foreclosure suit. Under the name John Boyd Cabot, George Arthur Cooper Bond died on the 10th of December 1959 in Martinsville, Indiana, when he was 65 as a result of a car accident. His death certificate stated he was born in Sydney, Australia, and his birth date was accurate. The informant was his legal advisor. George's parents are both listed as unknown. On the 11th of December 1959 in the Indianapolis News, Yesterday, John B. Cabot, 64, former owner of the French Lick Springs Hotel, was injured fatally in a traffic accident 7 miles north of Martinsville. The car skidded off the road into a tree while he attempted to pass a truck on a rain-slick road. Cabot's wife, Claire, 60, was taken to Morgan County Memorial Hospital at Martinsville. Another passenger in the car, Ido Pastelli, a 20-year-old Marine from Millbrook, New York, escaped injury. He was on leave visiting the Cabots at their Castle Knoll farm. The Cabots lived in the Castle Knoll farm between French Lick and Paoli. He owned the French Lick Springs Hotel in 1959 when it was put into receivership. Cabot and Mrs. Cabot were thrown from the car a 1958 Lincoln. Pastelli, who was in the back seat, remained in the car. Cabot died of a skull fracture and crushed chest en route to the Martinsville Hospital. The sheriff said Pastelli was dozing in the back seat at the time of the crash and related hearing Mrs. Cabot shout, "Watch out." Cabot is a former owner of hotels at Utica and Syracuse in New York and Miami, Florida, and purchased the French Lick Hotel in 1947. He operated the hotel until 1951 when it was placed into receivership. Cabot also formerly owned the Pluto Corporation, bottlers of mineral water from springs on the property of the French Lick Spa. Before he came to French Lick, Cabot owned the Cabot Shipping Company in New York. Claire Cabot sold Castle Knoll Farm from John Boyd Cabot's estate, and it was divided into 3 parcels of land. 800 acres was a hunting ground and lodge, and today it's known as the Wilston Wildlife Park that houses grizzly bears, elephants, giraffes, lemurs, and, interestingly, an Australian connection, kangaroos. And Claire died on the 24th of June 1960 in Jasper, Indiana. Lottie Emily Bond was born on the 29th of December 1895 in Brisbane, Queensland. She married George Power Miles, and at the time of their marriage was known by the surname of Thompson, his stepfather's name. George fought in World War I and rose to the rank of lieutenant and was in the 8th Infantry Brigade, 31st Battalion. They married on the 6th of July 1916 in Brisbane when George was 31 and Lottie was 18. They had a son, Graham Miles Thompson, on the 7th of March 1917 in Brisbane. On the 25th of October 1923, Lottie filed for divorce on the grounds of desertion. On the 2nd of September 1925, Lottie married Cyril Geoffrey Franklin in Melbourne at the Assembly Hall Scots Church in Collins Street. They lived in Malvern, and then they divorced in June 1930 after 4 years of marriage. The divorce papers say the petition of Lottie Emily Franklin of Balaclava in Victoria states that her husband had a period of indulging in heavy drinking and in consequence neglected his company's business, and early in 1926 the company was wound up and the respondent was out of employment. After the first 3 months of our married life, until the respondent lost his employment, no rent was paid for the flat or the household accounts, and the respondent got heavily into debt. Shortly after the 15th of June 1926, he informed me that he and Clifford Smith were contemplating a journey to Perth in Western Australia and proposed to form a dancing ballet, and the respondent, Smith, and myself left Melbourne by train for Perth. Upon arriving in Perth, we stayed at a hotel, and during the week or 2 immediately following our arrival, the respondent told me that the ballet venture had not proved successful and he couldn't pay our hotel expenses. I suggested I return to our flat in Melbourne to avoid the incurrence of further expense, and the respondent agreed. I paid the respondent from my own money the sum of £15 for my proportion of our joint hotel expenses on the 10th of July 1926 and left Perth for Melbourne. Upon my return to the flat, I wrote several letters to the respondent, informing him that our landlord required immediate payment of rent for the flat, but none of the letters received a reply. I was compelled to borrow a sum of £40 upon the security of my furniture and paid the rent due to our landlord. On the 28th of August 1926, the respondent returned from Perth and said he could not raise the money for the rent of the flat. We vacated on the 1st of September and moved into rooms in Punt Road, South Yarra, where we lived together until my departure for Noumea. At this time, the respondent also owed money to many tradespeople. He was heavily in debt and out of employment. At this time, my health was poor, and I was advised by the doctor to take a health trip. My husband said if I could pay my own expense, he would be agreeable to a trip, and said I could do so. On the 21st of September 1926, I left Melbourne for Sydney and travelled by steamer to Noumea, where I stayed for 2 months. During my stay, I wrote letters to the respondent fortnightly, but received no letter. During November 1926, I wrote to the respondent at our Punt Road address and informed him that I intended to return to Sydney on the 21st. I returned to Sydney, and upon arrival there was the respondent and my brother. The respondent took me to Usher's Hotel in Castlereagh Street, Sydney, where he had rooms, and we remained there till the 29th of November 1926. He then informed me that he left the flat in Punt Road and that the furniture and personal effects had been placed in store in Melbourne. Upon my return from Noumea, he was very cool towards me, and during the whole time we remained at Usher's Hotel, his conduct towards me was indifferent and without affection. He seemed to resent my presence as likely to be again burdensome, and he let me know that he was in continued idleness, heavily in debt, and without any prospect of paying. I asked him where and how he suggested we should live on our return to Melbourne. He said that we should stay at some hotel. I said that was impossible if we could not pay for it if he was not earning. He told me there was nothing in the future that he could see, and he let me know he had not intended to meet me, but my relatives had so taken it for granted that he felt impelled to do so. He said he had nothing except what he could get from his mother and could not get anything to do, and indicated that he was not likely to have enough for two. Upon my pressing the seriousness of the situation and urging him to come to some practical decision, he became angry and refused to discuss the matter further, stating he would return to Melbourne to his mother and told me I could do what I liked. I implored him not to do so, but to try and get a home together. He packed his belongings and on the 29th of November 1926 left me at the hotel. I believe he went to his mother, and he has lived practically at her expense ever since. Our hotel expenses were not paid, nor any arrangement made by him regarding the same, and I was ordered to leave the hotel. I did so and went to my brother, who was residing at Potts Point in Sydney, and remained there with him until the 7th of January 1927. From the time of his departure for Melbourne, I neither communicated with him nor received any communication from him from that time. He's made no contribution whatsoever to my support. I've maintained myself entirely from my earnings, from various positions as a teacher of French, and income received from the estate of my late grandmother, Charlotte Bond. On the 7th of January 1927, accompanied by my son, by my first husband, Graham Miles Thompson, who was then 9 years old, I visited Noumea again for the purpose of brushing up my French so I could teach it, and because it is cheap living there. Meanwhile, I remained there at a hotel until August 1927, when we returned to Sydney. Shortly after our return to Sydney, my son and myself returned to Melbourne, and I stayed with my brother at Lilydale and remained with him until November 1927. I then ascertained that my husband had removed my said furniture and effects from the store, and I did not know where they were. I ascertained that he borrowed money on the security of the furniture, and in default of payment of the amount, borrowed the said furniture and sold it to satisfy the loan. As my brother was called upon to give up residence at Lilydale in November 1927, I left Melbourne and went to Noumea for cheapness, where I stayed for the month of May 1928, when I returned to Melbourne and went to stay with my brother in a flat occupied by him in Elwood. I remained with my brother until August 1928. We then went to live in Malvern until October 1929. I then went to board at Candelayre in Esplanade Street, St Kilda, where I remained until February 1930. I took a position as a lady companion in Elwood, and I'm now living in a room with my son at Balaclava and earning a living and maintaining myself and my son as a teacher of French. I once saw my husband casually in Collins Street and asked him what he'd done with my furniture, and all he would say was he would send my trinkets, but he had not done so. During the period I was at Ulmer Road, I visited the respondent's mother at her home in St Kilda and informed her that I was short of money and asked her if she could assist me, as the respondent had left me and not contributed to my support. His mother stated that he had no money and that she herself was not prepared to assist me financially. I have never instituted proceedings for maintenance against him because I knew he had no money, was out of employment practically continuously from the time he left me in Sydney. He was heavily in debt and was in fact kept and supported by his mother, who on the occasion of my visit to her told me so. On the 17th of April 1935, in the law courts, holiday changes husband, wife gets divorced. Mr. Acting Justice Hart yesterday granted to Lena Sylvia Robinson an order nisi for the dissolution of her marriage with Albert Jordan Robinson, company manager, on the grounds of misconduct with Lottie Franklin, whose address was not stated. The defendant was a manager of the printing firm, and he went to Melbourne for 10 days, and when he returned, he was a different man. Prior to the 4th of March 1935, he seemed anxious to get the plaintiff out of the house, and he ill-treated her. Matters reached a point when he ordered her out of their house, and she was forced to take shelter with friends. On March the 12th, she showed a private inquiry agent the house where she and her husband had lived, and on the night of the 16th of March, they took up a position opposite the house and observed the movements of the occupants. Later, they entered the house, and the defendant, by this time, had put on a dressing gown and said to the witness, "You have all of the evidence you want, now go." Donovan said they would not go until the witness had seen the woman, so that she would be able to identify her. The woman stood at the door in a kimono, smoking a cigarette. In answer to his honour, the witness said that the woman was considerably older than she was, and she'd been married twice. The woman had a son who was 18. His honour granted a decree nisi, returnable in 3 months. 5 months after the divorce occurred, Lottie married Albert Robinson in Brisbane, Queensland, on the 11th of September. Lottie died on the 15th of February 1977 in Southport, Queensland, when she was 81. She was a librarian at the time of her death, and her granddaughter, Diane Thompson, was the informant. Getting back to Leonora and her marriage with Thomas Bond, in the Brisbane Telegraph on the 18th of October 1909, it announced that Leonora's marriage to Thomas Bond was declared null and void, as evidence was supplied to the court that Leonora had married Alexander McLean at Suva on the 26th of July 1884, and that Alexander McLean was living. The marriage was declared null and void by the decree of the Supreme Court of Queensland on the 13th of December 1910. And Leonora died on the 14th of January 1943 at Stockton, New South Wales, aged 76. The death certificate only shows that Leonora had one marriage to Alexander McLean, and she didn't have any children. The informant was the manager of the mental hospital where she died and did not know the whole story. Leonora, in fact, had 3 marriages and gave birth to 5 children, one whom died as an infant in Fiji. The other twin was Lorena Helen Jessie, who was born on the 2nd of May 1866 at Littleton in New Zealand. She married Robert Crawford Miller Bentley at Suva, Fiji, on the 30th of May 1885, when she was 19 and Robert 23. Robert Bentley died in February 1915. He was the collector of customs at Levuka, and then Lorena went on to live in New Zealand. They had 7 children, and Lorena died on the 21st of June 1927 at Levuka, Fiji. It says that she was the widow of the late Robert Crawford Bentley and the beloved sister of Frederick Hayes, aged 61. The third child, Frederick William Henry Hayes, was born on the 25th of November 1870 in Lawrence, New Zealand. He was only 6 when his father died, and he was apprenticed to Mr. Nicholson, a boat builder in Suva, for 8 months before he stowed away on a boat. It was believed that he was bound for America. However, he married Emily Wilhelmine Maria Hons on the 7th of August 1889 at the Lutheran Church at Nundah in Queensland. There are corrections on the marriage certificate, which shows Fred's full name, his correct age, which is 18, not 19, and his mother's correct name. According to his marriage certificates, he says he was born in Sydney. Fred worked as a fireman on steamers that sailed up and down the eastern Australian coastline. In 1891, he was a crew member on the steamship Urimbla and as a trimmer. The ship sailed from Rockhampton to Sydney. They had 2 daughters. One died in infancy, and they also had a son, Frederick Henry Jr., who was born in 1895 but died at the age of 7 months. Frederick left his marriage after a few years and was living in Sydney at the time of his mother's death in October 1914. Their only surviving child, Ruby Ethel Hayes, was born on the 23rd of December 1889 in Brisbane. She married James Arthur Rogerson on the 20th of November 1918 in Brisbane when she was 28 and Arthur 29. They had a son and a daughter in 1920 and 1923. Ruby died on the 14th of January 1943 in Brisbane at the age of 53, 11 years before her mother. There are no death records for Frederick. He was alive in 1927 when his sister Lorena passed away, and in 1943 Emily is living alone at Zilmere, and Emily died at the age of 84 in Zilmere in 1954. At 67 years old, and her son Fred Hayes was the informant. It said that she had been born in New York and she'd spent 30 years in New South Wales, and that she married William Henry Hayes at the age of 18 in New York. The children of the marriage, Leonora and Lorena, twins, both 48 at the time of their mother's death, Frederick, 44, living, with one male and two females deceased. So W.B. Churchwood said in my consulate in Samoa that Hayes' legitimate wife, a New Zealand lady, was residing in Apia in 1881. She had two lovely daughters and one son when I arrived, and after about a year left for Fiji. It also mentioned that at Apia she kept a hotel for some years after William's death, and Stonehewer Cooper in the Coral Islands of the Pacific said one of the most respected of the inhabitants of Apia, Samoa, in 1881 was Mrs. Hayes, the widow of the notorious Bully Hayes, perhaps the last of the pirates of the Pacific. So I hope you enjoyed the epic story of William Henry Hayes, Bully Hayes. And interestingly enough, the genetics seem to pass on, even though they didn't know him and he was quite young when he died. It seems that his children had certainly carried some of the genetic traits that their father had.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.